everybody. Welcome back to the Tales of the Pod podcast. My name is Michaela. I'm your host.
I'm your co-host, Nick. Welcome back, guys.
Welcome back to another spooky week. How you doing this week?
Good. How about you?
I'm good.
Yeah? Doing the news thing again?
So, I thought for this week's episode we would touch on iconic movie monsters.
Yes.
And the reason I want to touch on this is because I feel like you can't have, a horror movie podcast without giving credit to where credit is due, essentially.
Oh, God, yeah.
We're specifically going to be touching on, the Universal movie monsters, and they kind of just made up what we know as the genre today, and I feel like they're almost so foreign that they get overlooked.
Yeah.
We kind of just take them for granted. We're like, oh, of course that shirt has Frankenstein on it, but
right.
Nobody goes back and realizes, how important they really were and how iconic they were for the time.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, I think they're definitely, they're basically the foundations for horror, essentially. They started it all was with these monster movies, and even going back before them, even the, silent short films, they were, about monsters and stuff like that. So, I think that's what kind of pinned horror was these films,
And we touch on a lot of movies from, I would say, the 80s up, I'd say. We touch on a lot of movies from that. We touch on a lot of recent movies, which people may have not seen, so... But those movies wouldn't exist without the foundation of these movies. So I definitely don't want to do a podcast without discussing, giving credit where credit's due kind of thing.
I definitely agree. Definitely agree with you there.
So just as a little bit of an introduction, I did do some research on, the Universal movie monsters and why they are so important to the horror genre, how they're so important to culture.
Okay.
So when we talk about Universal movie monsters, we're talking about, Wolfman, Dracula, Frankenstein, King Kong, any of the old iconic horror movie monsters that you would think about, right?
Sure, definitely.
So Universal Studios kind of capitalized on all of these different movies and kind of made their own genre of monsters and classic monsters. It spanned from 1920 to 1950, and these monsters since have become cultural icons and had a profound impact on the horror genre, as I said before.
Oh, yeah.
They kind of pioneered the horror genre in a way, because before this, there wasn't as many movies about, monsters, per se.
I agree. I think they definitely brought it into, the big screen.
Yes.
Because I think, a lot of the films, they were silent first off, so that was kind of like a buzzkill. I know, obviously, in the 20s, it was amazing seeing something on a screen, before you, but, not being able to hear and you have to read and watch, I think that probably, so this was, now a movie that had sound to it, and they were monster movies, so, I definitely think they pioneered, modern day horror for sure.
And they're still relevant in modern day pop culture. Even if you talk to somebody who's not familiar with the horror genre or the movies coming out today, they know who Dracula is.
Oh, God, yeah.
They know who, the Bride of Frankenstein is. They know all of these movies.
Yes, exactly. They've stood the test of time, essentially.
Yes, essentially, they have an enduring legacy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they give people an interest in classic horror movies. They're like, oh, you know what, I've never seen, the original Frankenstein. I'm going to go back and watch it.
Right.
And it inspires people to go back and watch the older movies and get a sense of importance and admiration for these characters.
Exactly, and a lot of, and they're iconic, too. What Frankenstein is because of, the Universal pictures.
Yeah,
that's what you should visualize Frankenstein looking like, I guess.
And I think these were essentially, cinematic milestones, because I think this was probably the first time in history when, a character was so recognizable.
Yes. And
it's lasted this long and had such a legacy, and everybody knows who it is.
Right, exactly.
That's definitely a milestone for not just the horror genre, but cinema,
Oh, yeah, and I think a lot of these films ended up in, the Library of Congress as, pieces of American history and stuff like that. I'm pretty sure most Universal pictures ended up there,
I think that's definitely fair.
Cool.
All right, do you want to touch on your first monster, or you want me to go?
You can go.
So, the first monster I picked to discuss is the only Frankenstein. So, the movie Frankenstein is based on an 1818 novel, which that is crazy old that was a thing.
100 or 204, 6
yeah,
years
and
ago.
the movie adaptation of it came out over 100 years later.
Right.
So Mary Shelley, the author of the book, never got to see basically the fruits of her labor.
Yeah.
But the 1931 film Frankenstein came out, and Boris Karloff starred as the monster.
Yes, he did.
Gave a very notable iconic performance, I'd say.
Yeah.
So essentially, for those of you who don't know or maybe haven't seen it or whatever, essentially it's about a mad scientist. His name is Victor Frankenstein, and he kind of messes with the idea of, life after death and bringing people back from death, essentially.
Yeah,
and
like reanimating.
Yeah, he creates this monster and he names him Frankenstein, and it's actually quite a sad movie.
It is, I agree with that.
It's a very sad movie because he creates this monster, and Frankenstein, he can't really verbalize anything, he kind of just grunts, but he goes around and he tries to be accepted into society, tries to be accepted into the world, and they shun him.
Right.
And then he turns mean, and then he turns evil, but he didn't start out as mean or evil. Like, it teaches you to empathize with him at first.
I think he was just, confused,
Very
he didn't
confused,
know what to do,
Very confused, and instead of taking him in and, basically raising him or catering to him, they shunned him.
Right.
Then he became, the monster that they wanted so badly to be.
Yeah, and then killed that little girl too that he killed.
He did, yeah. He did kill a little girl, I guess.
I think that really put a bad taste in their mouth,
And they all tried to kill him at the end. They all had this mass riot and tried to murder him at the end, and I just don't think he knew any better. I mean,
I know, that was kind of an iconic scene too, when they're chasing him up to the windmill.
Yeah.
And, it's the angry mob, they got the pitchforks. Yeah, and he's scared out of his mind, he doesn't know what's going on. He doesn't know any better,
No, he doesn't know. It's very sad, but yeah, this film has had quite the cinematic legacy. I mean, a lot of these characters, I would say Frankenstein specifically, every Halloween you're going to see him. Someone's going to be dressed as Frankenstein still to this day, almost 100 years after the film. Came out in 1931. And it's still, everybody knows who Frankenstein is. That's amazing to have some sort of legacy like that.
Sure,
People still dress up as him. There's still decorations that are Frankenstein themed. I always paint my pumpkin Frankenstein themed.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he's iconic. I mean, that's what I meant earlier when I said it's because of Boris Karloff playing Frankenstein, you know what Frankenstein's supposed to look like now. He's got the bolts in his neck. I
was going to say too, his appearance too is just so iconic. To have something make him green like that.
Yeah, I know, right?
It's a very bold choice, and it's a memorable choice. The hairline always sticks with me.
Yes, exactly. It's like it was painted on.
Yes, it does look like it was painted on. But yeah, this monster specifically touches on a lot of things like ethics and morality. The idea of bringing someone back from the dead, or trying to make your own creation, and go against death, essentially, which is the way of life.
Right. I know it is kind of, I don't know what the word is, but it is kind of, I think that's what everybody's really trying to figure out is can life be manufactured artificially, and that's basically a good statement, this movie, to it, that whole idea, know.
And he's a very misunderstood and tragic figure in the horror genre. He doesn't start out, like I said earlier, he doesn't start out mean and angry and wanting to kill people.
Right.
Society pushes him there, and I think there's a lot to be said for that, how we treat others, not only just monsters, we treat others similar to that as well.
I agree. I definitely agree with you there.
And then continuing on with Frankenstein, he ended up getting the woman of his dreams in 1935. The Bride of Frankenstein came out, and it was a direct sequel to the 1931 film Frankenstein. And essentially, they figured out, Frankenstein is lonely, maybe we can make another creature like him, and they made The Bride of Frankenstein. Which, it's crazy to have a sequel that is almost as iconic as the first one, to have the first movie come out and be Frankenstein, and the second one be just as, if not more iconic. The Bride of Frankenstein, the way she looks, her presentation is just as iconic as he is.
Oh yeah, I mean, she's another horror, a monster image, I guess you could say. That's what you picture the Bride of Frankenstein to look like, I mean, got the crazy long hair with the white streak going through it, it's just... Yeah, the
long white dress.
Oh man, it's a classic.
Yeah, in history, this is considered an artistic achievement to have a sequel that is, considered to be, if not as good or better than the first.
Sure, yeah.
But also, it adds another iconic character to the movie series, and also gives Frankenstein some more humanity, almost.
It makes him seem a little more human.
Yes.
Yeah.
It gives him some more partner aspects, and it just adds more to the whole character, mythology, genre, things like that.
Right, exactly.
I love Frankenstein. Nick and I actually went to the movie theater a couple years ago, and they did a triple showing, Frankenstein, Wolfman, and Dracula, all
yes,
in one.
they did. Yep.
And that was pretty cool. But
Yeah.
I remember being so sad at the end of Frankenstein. I'm like, oh my god, they kill him.
I know
Like,
the ending is sad.
it's
yeah.
so sad,
I know,
and I feel so bad for him. Like,
and
he didn't ask to be here; they made him.
I know he doesn't want any of this.
No.
You know, it is kind of sad. It's like basically I didn't ask for any of this. You know.
No, and I mean, as far as the movie goes, like, I mean, we'll touch on this a lot for a lot of these movies, but for the time, the special effects, the acting, obviously Boris Karloff did a great job, but all of that put together, and for that to come out in the 1930s is just...
Sure.
I think if that came out today, nobody would blink twice. Like, nobody would think twice about it, but, like,
Yeah.
back then it was like, oh, you're making a movie about a monster that some scientist
Yeah,
created,
I know,
and
right?
he's gonna kill a kid. Like,
Yeah.
you're gonna show that scene on screen where he kills a little girl. That's ballsy.
Yeah, I know.
That's a lot for that.
Oh yeah, me in that time too, and again too, it's like they were pioneering the way too, because it
Yeah.
hasn't really been done before in that
No.
kind of way, I guess.
And it hasn't been done a lot since. Like, that's usually something that people stay away from, is showing kids on camera being killed.
I don't think they actually show it though. I think they kind of just hint to it.
He drowns her, doesn't he?
Yeah, but they don't show it.
Yeah, no,
like,
he doesn't show it.
Yeah,
but
but it like basically hints to that.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, it's pretty gripping. The
Yeah.
first time I saw it, I was like, oh my
I
god.
think they actually had it shot but they were like, no, you can't put that.
Yeah, I saw something behind the
film,
scenes
you know?
where the little girl was like scared of water, and I think Boris Karloff had to keep promising her like milkshakes or something if she.
Yeah.
Like, the longer you stay underwater, the more milkshakes you get, which looking back is so problematic.
Yeah.
You're telling her to stay underwater as long as she can.
I know.
Just
Anyway,
like
I think Boris Karloff got a lot of backlash for that too. I think because of that scene. You know,
I'm sure it didn't go over well.
people didn't like him.
I'm sure. I'm sure out of all the things to go over well, that was not one of them.
Right. Oops.
Alright, do you want to go touch on yours?
Yeah. So I did Dracula. Basically, vampires is kind of what I picked as the monster, but it obviously starts with the novel by Bram Stoker, Dracula, which was published in 1897. And it's the same story, essentially, that the 1931 version basically covers. So it's this guy, he's taking a business trip to stay in Transylvania with the nobleman Count Dracula. Finds out that Count Dracula is actually a vampire. The Count ends up getting into England somehow, and he goes after the guy that came to visit him and everything like that, and the guy's wife. And then Abraham Van Helsing comes in. He's like basically like, I don't know, like an exorcist kind of guy.
Yeah.
You know, he's a scientist, but he like knows how to hunt and kill vampires too, essentially. So that's
Jack of all trades kind of thing.
yeah, essentially. So that's basically like the gist of the Dracula movies. But the first time Dracula was actually shown on film, it was in 1921, and the film was titled Dracula Halala, which is it's also known as Dracula's Death, and it's a silent Austrian movie that came out 1 year before Nosferatu did.
Okay.
So this is actually the first time that Dracula was mentioned on film. Yes. It's basically, it's not the same story, though, as the book would entitle. It's about this girl named Mary Land, who's her father's in an insane asylum, and Count Dracula's in the insane asylum with them. The father dies. Dracula takes the girl hostage, or tries to turn her into a vampire, essentially. And that's the first time Dracula is shown on camera. So we got that, and then fast forward a year later, in 1922, you have the infamous film Nosferatu, which was another silent film made in Germany by F.W. Moranu.
Does Nosferatu translate to Dracula?
No, Nosferatu is actually a Romanian word that means the offensive one or the insufferable one.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, it's called Nesferituo, I think is how you say it. And Romanian's hard language, but that's what that means. But so Nosferatu came out in 1922, and at that point, that was basically the unofficial retelling of Bram Stoker's novel, and we've all seen, I'm sure a lot of you have seen Nosferatu. It is basically kind of the same story, except it's Count Orlok, not Count Dracula. They had to change things because there was some legal trouble that Bram Stoker's estate actually sued the company.
I mean, that's fair.
Yeah.
And if you haven't seen Nosferatu, maybe you've seen the SpongeBob episode where he says Nosferatu.
Yeah. So that's it's the same vampire and everything that you see in the SpongeBob episode. Yeah. So
they're essentially the same, right?
Yeah. What do you mean?
It's the same story.
It's the same story. Yeah, but it's.
I haven't seen Nosferatu. I've seen Dracula.
Oh, so you haven't even seen it? Okay, all right.
I mean, I've seen the creepy picture where he's kind of like
his
hands. I know what he looks like.
So it's the same story as Bram Stoker's novel. They had to change some things because of legality issues. Is essentially what Nosferatu. It's the same storyline. It's just the people, the title or the names of characters and everything is kind of changed.
Okay.
So that's Nosferatu. That came out in 1922, and then we finally get to the Universal Dracula, which came out in 1931. And that's the iconic one that basically brought Dracula into the limelight, essentially, because it had sound. It was actually a retelling of a stage play called Dracula by Hamilton, I don't know how you say his name, Dini? And it was the play was adapted from Bram Stoker's novel. So it's basically a direct retelling of Bram Stoker's novel, essentially. So, yeah, I mean, we've all seen the movie. It's Bela Lugosi plays Count Dracula. It's basically the same exact as the book, which I had mentioned earlier.
Right. It's iconic, though. Like, there's so many... Like, when you actually think about it, there's so many iconic things in Dracula that are still used today. And because, like, I mean,
bat and everything, too.
Well, vampire culture has been so popularized, I'd say, in the 20th century. Like, there's been so many shows and movies and, like, film adaptations of it. And they pulled from things like this, like the coffin, the bat, the sunlight, like, things like that. They pulled from these movies.
Yeah.
And they're still used today. Like, it's just... found as like vampire folklore at this point.
So that's funny you say that too, because it actually wasn't. I don't believe it was from Universal's Dracula that they actually got. Was it Nosferatu where they pulled all that from? I can't remember. I think it's either Nosferatu or the Hammer Dracula, that's what I'm going to talk about next. That gives like the modern traits to the vampires that we see nowadays. But yeah, essentially with the Universal Dracula, there were a lot of sequels and spin-offs. There's like Frankenstein meets Dracula and stuff like that. I think Abbott and Costello meet Dracula too.
They met Frankenstein too.
And this actually, the Universal's Dracula, when it came out in 1931, was actually one of the Library of Congress Preservation of National Film Registry is culturally, historical, and aesthetically significant.
Interesting.
So it's definitely a testament of time for Universal's Dracula. And I mean, it's the iconic, I want to suck your blood, Bela Lugosi that plays him, which he's brilliant for the role. I mean, that's generally, that's what you think of when you see or think of Dracula. You think of Bela Lugosi.
It's one of those actors that like is the role. Someone else tries to play it, it's hard to
Yes, exactly.
Which is it, Dracula or Nosferatu? I know they're remaking one of them, and Bill Skarsgård's going to play
It's going to be Nosferatu.
Is it Nosferatu? I'm excited for that, though. I think he'll do a good job.
They remade Nosferatu in 1979 or 1969, I can't remember, but Klaus Kinski played Nosferatu, and he's a very famous actor. He did a very good job. It was basically a direct remake of the 1922 one. So that's the Universal, but then you have fast forward to 1958, where you have Hammer Film Studios doing their own rendition of Bram Stoker's Dracula, which this is really where Dracula takes off, because you have Sir Christopher Lee as Dracula and Peter Cushing as Van Helsing. And so those two, and there's so many films that have came from Hammer Studios that have those two playing the same character in all the movies.
Interesting.
So really, I mean, yeah, that was 30 years ago. Bela Lugosi basically was the iconic, but now thinking back, everyone's going to think Christopher Lee is Dracula, because he really is. He's the one that had like the fangs. He had, he the sunlight, the stakes, and everything. That's where all that stuff came in, was Christopher Lee's Dracula, essentially. And he was kind of like, because Bela Lugosi, he was kind of more just kind of like a dude, nothing really spectacular. He was creepy. But Christopher Lee was more like Studley.
The whole persona, yeah.
Well, he was like attractive, you know. He was
like
so
he started the whole like attractive vampire
yes,
trend?
essentially, yeah. You know, I mean, he was a good-looking guy.
Interesting. Okay.
And so he basically got that. That kind of now ties into the whole vampire Dracula kind of sense. You know, he's like this suave kind of guy.
Good looking,
suave,
yeah.
smooth, suave, whatever. So that's essentially the Hammer, and I mean, it's the same story as Bram Stoker's.
Yeah, just being retold with different actors,
Yes,
different.
Exactly, and then again, there's countless spin-offs of the Hammer's Dracula. There's Brides of Dracula. Dracula Has Risen from the Grave. The Satanic Rites of Dracula, and the list goes on. I think there's like 10 whole movies. And I don't think Christopher Lee plays Dracula in every single one of them. I think maybe 2 he's not in.
Okay.
But yeah, and they're definitely, that's probably my favorite version of Dracula is the Hammer rendition of Dracula's, because it's better, you know. I mean, it's a little later on in, you know, history and everything, so the effects
special
and
effects
everything.
are better. Movies have come a long way in that time period.
And there's something, it's just cool, I don't know, just seeing those two, Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing, work together. They're brilliant. I mean, it's just so cool. And he's the iconic Dracula. I mean, he's got the fangs, the red eyes, you know, the creepy, scary, you know, Bela Lugosi's just like, they're pulling the cape over his face, you know.
He didn't do the cape that long.
So that's.
I mean, sometimes it takes a little bit to like fully form a character, I'd say.
I agree.
It takes a few movies, takes a few ideas, different minds to kind of put all these aspects together and form a character, especially one that's been around for that long.
No, I definitely agree, and also like, I mean, it's like vampires themselves. I mean, they've kind of been throughout, you know, folklore and everything. Yes. So somebody to write a book about it that gets developed into a movie, and then the movies basically shape what they're supposed to look like, you know.
And a lot of these movies, or I'd say monsters, have a basis in folklore or fears or scary stories or things like that where they can pull from. Like, I know when I was researching this, one of the things that came up was the Mothman and the Mothman Prophecies.
Yes.
It's a newer movie. It's not
a
part of the Universal Monsters, but that's a big part of folklore, you know, like the Jersey Devil, things like that. So a lot of movies do pull from, you know, hand told or not hand told, passed down stories. That's the word I'm looking for. Hand told.
So yeah, that's essentially with I guess really just focusing on vampires, and then there's countless. I mean, there's so many vampire movies that have come out since the Hammers. Mm-hmm. Oh my God, we had Gary Oldman playing Dracula and Bram Stoker's.
Films.
Twilight. I mean, there's just been Van Helsing. You know,
Vampire
Diaries. There's been shows. Yeah, so it's
and they all kept that same theme of like a good-looking vampire.
I think that's what I mean.
The red eyes, the no sunlight. Yeah,
no sunlight. That's really with the Hammer films. They kind of shaped the modern Dracula.
It's interesting. I wonder what it was about Dracula to keep being remade, because like I just touched on Frankenstein. Now that I'm thinking about it, there wasn't that many. Like Frankenstein hasn't been remade in
after the 70s probably.
Yeah.
You know,
it hasn't been remade in a while.
I think it's probably a little overdue for a couple remakes. You know,
I know if we were movie directors, I'd be like, let's get on that.
Yeah. All right, what you got for your other one here?
So I picked the cultural phenomenon that was King Kong. The first movie came out in 1933, and then I'd say the most notable version of King Kong came out in 1976, starring our Lord and Savior, Queen, love her, Jessica Lange, and Jeff Bridges. Jessica Lange was, the helpless
dude.
Jessica Lange was the helpless girl, that he holds in his hand by the Empire State Building. Babe, Queen, love her.
Oh, yeah.
And then there was a 2005 Peter Jackson remake. Did you know he did one?
Oh, hell yeah.
Okay. So essentially King Kong is just a giant ape. He comes from an island called Skull Island, and it wasn't until, I believe, Peter Jackson's remake in 2005 that they tried to give King Kong a little bit of backstory and give him, some kind of reasoning where he came from, why, what happened to him.
Yeah, it's like a prehistoric island.
Yes.
Can I just interrupt you real quick? I just want to make a tie. So remember when I was telling you about Dead Alive, the movie Peter Jackson made, and how that creature came from Skull Island?
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Gotcha.
So he basically had that whole idea back in the 90s of Skull Island.
He's a King Kong fan, then.
Oh, yeah. Yes, he is.
So essentially it's a huge ape, some sort of prehistoric being, and he escapes the island that he's on. He gets lost in New York City, and there's all these iconic scenes. And just for the time, like especially in 1933, the special effects that came from this movie, I believe the 1933 version was stop motion.
Yeah, I think you're right, yeah.
And then I think 1976 was some kind of version of CGI.
Mm-hmm.
But to have those kind of special effects and to have the giant looking ape on screen and have it look somewhat realistic and real and scare people was for the time, it was genre defining for sure. I think it was the first animalistic monster that there was.
And I think that was really like people's image of a monster. I mean, this thing's colossal. I mean, it's climbing
the Empire State Building. Like,
this
is a monster. This isn't a man with fangs. This isn't like a science experiment, whatever. He's climbing a building. He's got Jessica Lange like in his hand, or whoever the final girl was in 1933 as well. I don't mean to diss her.
What's her name? Faye?
I don't mean to diss her, but she wasn't Jessica. So. But he, he's got her holding in his hand like this, and she looks tiny in his huge palm. Like, it's a monster.
Right.
It's a full-blown monster. So, I think it preys on people's, fears of, first of all, prehistoric animals, because we were around, it's the rare time in history that humans weren't there to experience it. So your imagination kind of runs wild to what could have been roaming around back then. Could there have been some sort of prehistoric ape running around?
Oh yeah, I mean, even look at like fossils nowadays. Do they find like snakes that were like 50 feet long?
Right.
Like, can you imagine that? Or like these giant centipedes?
And now imagine it getting lost in New York City, and
it
doesn't have the brain capacity or anything to understand what's happening. And just a great movie, definitely. A very culturally impactful movie. It's been remade quite a few times. It's referenced a ton. Like, everybody knows King Kong.
Oh, God, yeah.
You say that and everybody knows who it is.
Donkey Kong, too.
Donkey Kong. I would say, along with Frankenstein, too, this movie makes you empathize with the monster a little bit.
Yeah. He's just a wild animal.
And he gets scared when he's on the Empire State Building. There's planes flying at him trying to put him down. He gets scared, and then he starts to really like the girl that he's holding and all of that. You see that he kind of has feelings, and you feel bad for him.
Yeah,
like,
you do. Yeah.
He doesn't know. He doesn't have the brain capacity or the empathy or anything.
Sure. I mean, yeah, he's just really a monkey when it all comes down to it. You know?
But yeah, there's been a ton of crossovers too with these movies. There's King Kong versus Godzilla.
Yeah.
I mean, it's been an iconic movie.
Yeah, there's been remakes, and I think a couple remakes of King Kong versus Godzilla and everything too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think more recently they remade one King Kong, and I'd be interested. I don't think I've seen it. I think it was like in 2010s maybe. And I'd be interested to see that because of how far along special effects have come from the stop motion anime that we had.
Well, even Peter Jackson's, I mean, his special effects are cutting edge.
Right.
His was really good at the time. That was the one with Jack Black.
Okay.
Yeah, so
I love Jack Black.
Yeah, that was a great one.
But yeah, King Kong, definitely iconic just for being, like you said, like one of the first, like people think this is a monster. And it's not too far-fetched if we... we
really don't know what's out there.
We come from apes, so it's like there's that sense of connection there. Like,
sure, yeah.
Were we like this at one point? There's a lot to go over there,
Yeah, it really is, I mean, and we do got a connection with him, you know. I mean, he clearly, he started feeling for the lady he had in his hand, so.
Right, so. I feel for Jessica Lange too if I was with her.
Sure. Pretty lady,
That's probably what his 8-line went to. He's like, oh, pretty girl. He's like, oh, not the planes flying at me.
I know, that's another iconic scene in cinema history, too. It's like, he's like holding on to the top of it, and he's like swatting the planes,
Yeah, if I were to ever go to like, film school or whatever, and you had to like put together a list of like iconic scenes that make you want to be a director, that would be one of them.
Oh, for sure.
The idea of this thing, like, it's so ridiculous and outrageous, him crawling the Empire State Building, but it's iconic and it's lasted the test of time, I would say.
I don't know, people, again, too, being the year it came out, people have never seen anything like that on film before. They're probably like, whoa,
And it's still culturally relevant, I'd say. Say you say King Kong to maybe a 10-year-old, they would still have some sort of idea,
Yeah, or you'd hope so, at least.
I hope so.
Well, alright, so I did Werewolves and the Wolfman movie that came out in 1941. I guess I'll just start real quick with just in folklore. Werewolf is basically an Old English word meaning man-wolf, or it's also occasionally referenced to lycanthrope, which is an ancient Greek word meaning wolf-human. And basically, it's an individual that can shapeshift into a wolf. not really like how we picture, you know, it's like a man with hair all over and
Right.
wolf-like. I mean, this was like an actual person that would just like pop into a wolf, you know, and be like a wolf running around. But modern day cinema, that's what they kind of did, you know, once it started being put on film and everything.
Some of the
like
transition scenes in some of the werewolf movies are painful. I think it's The Halloween where it's
Oh,
really
yeah.
long and drawn out,
Yes.
painful scene of him transitioning to a
Yeah,
werewolf.
it was like his fingers are like, oh yeah, it's creepy.
Yes.
But so that's basically in folklore what werewolves are referred to, and then you have in 1941, you have the Wolfman, which is Lon Chaney Jr. plays the star role. Essentially, just real quick, he goes back to visit his rich father. I think his father died. Oh no, I'm sorry. It was his brother who died, and then he went to go and reconcile with his dad because they kind of had like a falling out, and then he ends up running into these.
He goes to like a carnival or something.
Yeah, it was like the gypsies were in town.
Yeah.
There was gypsies in town, and the gypsy basically puts a curse on him.
Yes.
And there's like a pentagram that's on his hand, and basically in a full moon he turns into a werewolf or a wolf man. And he goes terrorizing the town, and he doesn't remember that he's the one doing it, so he's kind of helped when he changes back. He's trying to figure out like what the heck's going on too, and then he finally realizes like, oh crap, I'm the wolf man. You know, it's a classic. It's kind of like a gothic horror, so it's a little bit, you know, set in like a weird kind of far out like castle type of area.
It is. It's creepy.
know.
Even the forest they shoot it is very creepy.
Yeah, there's like fog rolling around.
And there's a random like carnival with gypsies in the middle of the forest.
Yes, and of course the gypsy is Bela Lugosi.
Yeah.
Count Dracula that puts the curse on him. So that's another little, you know, Easter egg in the film too. So that's basically essentially the Wolfman movie. It's very iconic. I mean, Lon Chaney Jr. That's iconic, Wolfman. When you think of werewolf, I instantly, even with all the ones that have been remade, I'm not thinking of like, you know, Underworld or anything like that, you know, in the modern werewolf or Twilight or anything like that. I'm thinking the Wolfman.
Yeah.
you know, the hairy face.
I like the Wolfman. I will say, I think that was a good movie.
I like it. It's one of my favorite. One of my favorite Universal pictures for sure.
And I will say too, just like a PSA, it's hard when you initially look at these movies coming from somebody who's like, you know, 20s, 30s, like younger person, and you put them on initially and it's in black and white. Like your first instinct, I know for me, my first instinct is to turn it off.
She does not like black and white movies.
But I don't think I'm alone on that. I think a lot of people were so spoiled with color TV that I think your first instinct is to be like, I don't want to watch this in black and white. Like, what's happening? But I will say, if you sit through the first like 10 minutes of them and you get used to it, you don't even notice it anymore.
Yeah, you really don't.
You really don't.
It's just,
and these movies are worth watching, even though a lot of them are only found in black and white. They're worth watching, I will say.
Yeah, and I think too, like a lot of them are also, I think they tried to like colorize them and stuff like that. But I don't know exactly how many. But I think
I don't know either.
I don't think like the main like these three that we just talked about
I don't think they're
recolorized.
No. But I will just say it's worth giving it a shot.
Yes, I definitely agree. And then, so basically, that basically paved the way for the werewolf movies of the modern day. And then you have, you know, American Werewolf in London and The Howling, which came out the same year. So it was like a double feature year for werewolves movies. And those ones definitely, I think, that's, I think, what a werewolf would really look like if there were to be one. You know, a man shape-shifting into a wolf. I mean, they were violent, you know. I mean, they were very painful and violent looking. And then you have some, like, the cheesy ones that came out, like, in the B movies, like, you know, and then you had Abbott and Costello meet the Wolfman and everything like that, and Frankenstein meets the Wolfman that came out. They were kind of like the B movies of, like, the 50s and stuff like that. Then you had, like, Dog Soldiers, Underworld, that came out in the 2000s, and then obviously the Twilight film series with both vampires and werewolves in them, so that's pretty cool. And then the classic Van Helsing movie from 2004, basically putting all monsters into one film, essentially. You know, so definitely a great movie there, Van Helsing. Not really horror; it's more of an adventure kind of action movie, but still wicked cool. So that's essentially the Wolfman. Definitely, I think probably one of my favorite characters. I love how in like The Howling, the transformation.
Yeah, it's like painful.
Yeah, it's super. Painful. And I think that Dee Wallace, E.T.'s mom, she was like getting attacked by the werewolf, but somehow didn't die. I remember it was like had her pinned against the wall, but it wasn't like it was just so like rabid. It wasn't like killing her. It was just like
that's how I picture like being cursed with something and then having to transition into a werewolf. That's how I picture the process to look. It's painful and drawn out and slow.
Right.
That's how I picture it to be. You know.
Mm-hmm. That's essentially too in folklore. They followed that pretty good in Wolfman as of how you get basically turned into a wolf
with a full moon.
Well, that, but it's like there's a curse put on you essentially.
Oh, I see.
You know, or it's like it's essentially you're cursed by some sort of voodoo kind of thing going on, some sort of witch doctor stuff.
Witch doctor.
All right, what you got?
Okay, so for mine, I would say, I don't know if this is as well known maybe as some of the previous ones we've talked about. It's still pretty popularized. I think it's a great movie. Mm-hmm. For my next one, I picked Creature of the Black Lagoon. The movie came out a little bit later than the other ones. It came out in 1954. And it's all about essentially the creature from the Black Lagoon. His name is Gilman, and it's like this green, well, it's in black and white, but he's this green creature. And I will say the special effects for this movie are great because the suit that he's in to look like this underwater creature, the gills on the side of his neck even breathe.
Yeah,
he breathes.
I know, it's cool.
Which is crazy. I mean, he's some sort of humanoid amphibian with gills, scales, webbed hands and feet. Mm-hmm. He's basically the perfect mix of like a fish and a human all put together, but he can still walk.
Right.
Essentially, I think it's a group of like archaeologists, and they're trying to explore like a prehistoric area, and they discover, I think, a fossil from the river that shows that there's some sort of
it was like a hand sticking out of like the riverbed.
Yes.
It was like a weird looking hand.
But it was like a large, almost like Bigfoot looking size webbed hand.
Yes.
So they're
webbed hand, that's what it was. Yeah.
So they're looking in the river and they're like, okay, well, there's some kind of creature in here that hasn't been discovered yet by man. Mm-hmm. And it's cheesy. It's like
it is
the Gilman's hand. He comes out and it's on the boat, and like the music goes dun dun dun.
Yeah, the music. It's like when the hand comes out of the water, the symphony kicks in, and it's just it's just like very like ambiguous hand coming out of the water.
Yep, and then he's kind of scared, but also fascinated by humans because the Gilman has never seen humans before either. They've never seen him, and he's never seen them.
Yes.
So he, as a theme in a lot of these movies, he starts to take a liking to the girl in the group.
Yeah.
But to the guys, he's kind of harsh towards them.
Right.
But he has a little bit of empathy towards her. But I mean, it's an iconic movie. It caused a lot of spin-offs. There was a lot of spin-offs of this movie.
Yeah, there wasn't there?
There was a lot of spin-offs. It was like Gilman meets whoever, or Attack of this, or whatever.
Yeah, it's like the creature something, like Creature Returns.
The Creature Returns.
Yeah, there was a couple of spin-offs of that.
But I think this is interesting because, it's not, it's far-fetched, but it's not. I mean, like we were saying before with King Kong, like it's possible that there is some sort of prehistoric creature, like Bigfoot. A lot of people debate Bigfoot.
Yes, exactly.
This is like Bigfoot of the ocean, essentially.
Essentially, yeah, like some underwater humanoid, basically.
Yes, and it was just part of like those outrageous horror movies that came out during that time with all these different creatures and monsters and things like that, and people must have ate that shit up because there was a ton of them.
Yeah, like, I mean, look at all the ones that are like
Attack of the Crab,
Corbo the Great,
Crab Killers,
Wasp Woman,
all of these. So I would say even just the movie poster itself is very iconic with the Gilman like coming out of the water and just holding the woman, and the men are in the background. The whole movie is just very, very iconic, and it's still well known today. And I think he's a really cool looking monster.
I think I agree with you. I think all the movie posters for all these Universal creatures, I mean, they were awesome. I mean, they were the movie posters were. I mean, I can see why people flock to the theaters. It's like, what is this?
And something cool too for being in 1954, the underwater cinematography for this movie.
Very well done.
They filmed underwater, and that's. I don't know if this was the first film to do it. I would assume it's one of the first, at least.
And I would imagine so, yeah.
And it's crazy. It's all underwater, and you can see kind of the Gilman swimming away. You can see the divers swimming with their little
harpoon gun things and trying to shoot at them. Yeah.
Yep. No, it's a great movie. Super interesting. I really enjoy this. I really enjoy this one.
I know you do. You like the Black Lagoon. All right, I picked The Mummy. So again, just a little backstory. So mummies, obviously, you think Egypt first
Right.
time you think of mummies, or ancient civilization, essentially.
Cleopatra, all that good stuff.
Yes. So the first time a mummy was shown on film was in 1899. And so that's going back quite a long time ago. It was a short, silent trick film. So basically what a trick film was essentially it was like a magician that had access to a camera and like do magic on camera. It was called Robbing Cleopatra's Tomb. And the film, basically, it's a short film. It's like 5 minutes long. Not even. This magician chops up the mummy of Cleopatra and then like does some sort of magic and resurrects her, and there's a woman that rises from the chopped up mummy. Oh. And that's the end of the movie. So that was the first time it was actually put on film. And then I believe there was a couple other ones that came out. Again, these were shorts. They weren't, full-length movies. They came out in like the 19-teens and then like beginning of the 20s, I think. But then we land in 1932 with Universal's The Mummy. And that one basically put the mummy into what we picture the mummy looking like. It was Boris Karloff plays the mummy. So again, a great actor to play that.
He was just killing it, man.
He was, and he's got a sad story too. When we do Horror Icon episode, we could he's got a life, man. But yeah, back to the Mummy. So essentially, the movie starts out. They're at this archaeological expedition in Egypt, and they find this mummy. I think his name is Imhotep. And they basically bring the mummy back. I think it's to England. I don't know. I can't remember. They bring him back from the tomb and stuff, and then he comes to life after the scroll that one of the scientists read. They read it, and it brings the mummy to life again. It's called the Scroll of Thoth, and basically the mummy just starts attacking people. It's basically all the movie is the mummy attacking, and I think there's a spell that they put back on him and everything like that, and then he turns back into just a dead body. Okay. So yeah, that's the Mummy in a nutshell, essentially. So, but after so it led to the modern day depiction of mummies. You think the bandages being wrapped up and everything like that. So
and the scroll too. That's always a common thing. Where if you read the scroll out loud, then they come to life.
Yeah, there was that. I think it was in the Creep Show, or it might have been. I can't remember if it was Creep Show or not, or Tales from the Dark Side, but there was one. It was
Creep Show.
Where they do the same thing. They read something from this guy's got a mummy in his dorm, and I think it was Steve Buscemi. Wasn't it Steve Buscemi that had the mummy?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was him. And then he reads the scroll, and the mummy starts killing people. Again, there was some spin-offs. There was a direct sequel, The Mummy's Hand, that came out in 1940. The Mummy's Tomb. Again, that's Lon Chaney, actually. Lon Chaney Jr. plays the mummy in that one. There's just a bunch, and it goes on all the way up until the 50s. Then you have, like, the modern day Mummy with Brendan Fraser that came out. And then we actually watched one not too long ago called Pyramid, which was really cool.
That was pretty good.
Essentially the same. It's about a mummy, but it's like more of a god kind of thing coming back to life. An Egyptian god. So that was really good. That's a good one to check out.
That's stayed a consistent theme, I'd say, all throughout mummy movies, is the idea of like going in a pyramid or going into their ancient burial ground and disturbing it and then seeing what happens. Like there's always some kind of negative energy entity that comes from disturbing a mummy after they're being buried.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it too came from like making the Mummy movie is how they just recently discovered, 10 years ago, they discovered Tutankhamun's tomb, and like a lot of weird stuff happened with that. There was like the curse of Tutankhamun and everything like that, where, what's his name, Carter, he's the professor, he ended up like losing his son and stuff like that, and a bunch of bad stuff happened, so I think they pulled a lot of stuff, to make that movie from real life, occurrences, so kind of based on a true story kind of thing. But, that's basically, essentially, the Mummy. one of my favorites.
I haven't seen the old one in a while. I think I've only seen the Brendan Fraser one.
Yeah, Hammer did, I believe, a rendition of it in like the 50s. Peter Cushing again and Christopher Lee plays the mummy in that one. That's a good one too. I really like that one. That one's more modern, still in black and white, but the mummy's a little bit more like violent, you know, because it's Christopher Lee playing it. You know, he's like running around and stuff like that. But yeah, that's essentially the mummy right there in a nutshell.
Okay, so for my next one, I picked probably my personal favorite for my next one. I picked Jaws. Dun it. So if anybody out there doesn't know, I don't know why, but Jaws was directed by Steven Spielberg, came out in 1975, and it was, I'd say, arguably one of the most impactful movies of the horror genre, despite the monster itself. I'd say it was just one of the most impactful movies on culture, on people, on the genre.
Right.
So of course the monster in Jaws is the shark, which on set they nicknamed him Bruce. So I will refer to him as Bruce. Bruce is a huge great white shark. Like there's no way great white sharks are even that big, but he was.
Oh yeah.
And essentially he starts terrorizing a town off the coast of, I think it's like Maine or something.
I think it was Maine.
Yeah,
it's Martha's Vineyard or something like that.
It's a fictional island that they're on, but essentially, you know, summer, everybody hits the beach. It's a very summer town. They count on tourism for their funds. And someone gets attacked while out swimming by the great white.
Oh, yeah.
And the amazing thing about this movie is that their budget was, like, nothing. So Bruce kept malfunctioning. You know, the robot kept, you know, it wouldn't work very well. So the shark is actually only on screen for 4 minutes.
Oh, wow, I did not know that.
They couldn't afford to have him on screen longer because they couldn't afford to fix it.
Right, keep breaking them.
Yes. So they rely on things like music, you know, shooting the camera different ways to kind of insinuate. You know, it's shot almost first person in the view of the shark, so you think that you are the shark going at the person. Like, you see these little legs swimming in the water.
Which was a great way they filmed that.
It's a great way they filmed it.
Point of view, essentially.
And it's crazy because they did it all for just budget reasons, but it ended up, like, revolutionizing the whole genre because now we have so many horror movies where we don't see the victim or we don't see the villain, and we're left wondering what's going on. We have music scores that make us unsettled, and we're on edge. And we're like, okay, we know something's coming, but we can't see it.
Yeah, you hear the music coming.
Yeah, they basically revolutionized a whole way of directing these movies without even really realizing it.
Oh yeah.
So essentially it stars Chief Brody, played by Richard Dreyfuss. He gets in touch with a marine biologist and a seasoned shark hunter. You know, there's a big climax scene at the end where they're out on the boat and the boat gets tilted. The shark starts eating at the bottom of the boat.
Yes.
And the shark hunter, played by Robert Shaw, he gets eaten. I think he says something funny when he gets eaten, too.
I loved his character.
Yeah, he was funny.
He was the best. He was like the comedic relief. I mean, you couldn't help. He was just a salty old curmudgeon sea sailor dude, you know?
And the marine biologist is like, no, we can't kill him this way. And he's like, no, we're going to kill him. It was funny.
I loved him, man. He was my favorite character in that whole movie.
But Jaws is just my favorite. He's my favorite monster for a lot of reasons, but I would say just how this scared, I would say, a whole group of people. Like, people are still scared to this day to go swimming in a pool. Like, there's no shark in a pool. I've heard people say they were scared to take a bath after this.
That's crazy, man. Just water scares them.
Just water. All because of a robotic shark. And it's just, it's I
mean, nuts. It is terrifying because, I mean, you hear about shark attacks happening in real life all the time.
That's the thing, I mean, if you actually research sharks, they're not like this at all. They're not this predatory. I mean, they are prehistoric animals, but they're not this predatory towards humans. Yeah. But it doesn't matter. Everybody saw Jaws.
Yeah, so exactly.
Everybody thinks they are. So people weren't swimming in lakes, even though sharks are in lakes.
Right.
I mean, screw the ocean. People were like, nope, not a chance.
Beaches were closed. And
I just think that's so crazy.
I know, the pool gets me, man. You're going to swim in your swimming pool, you can literally see the bottom of
it.
I've
heard people say that. But yeah, like the suspense and tension that this movie builds just by not even showing the shark, but just the idea of a shark coming at you while you're, you know, just the idea you're hanging halfway out of the water, you're kicking, these people are living their best life on summer and a shark comes right out underneath you. Yep. That's terrifying.
Oh, God, yeah.
the impact on beach culture, like I kind of said, the realistic and unseen threat. Like, there is a threat when you're in the ocean, obviously, of course.
Oh, yeah.
But it's unseen, and you don't know when it'll come, where it'll come from. And a lot of people still don't like the ocean to this day, not even just for Jaws, for a lot of reasons.
Oh, yeah, there's millions of things.
Right. But after researching this movie, I realized how impactful it was in other movies for the same sense. Like, you don't see what's coming, but you know something's coming.
Oh,
and it just builds on that tension, and it just gets higher and higher.
Yes.
The music gets higher and higher.
I know, like how the score goes up with the music,
But yeah, I love this movie, and something cool I found about this movie, like a little fun fact, is it invented the idea of a summer blockbuster. There had never been the concept.
Oh, really?
There'd never been the concept of a summer blockbuster before of Jaws.
Wow.
It came out, I think, in July, and, it's a beachy, fun movie.
And sure.
It did so well that now, to this day, movies try to copy the same pattern and come out, in the middle of summer and be a summer blockbuster. But this movie invented that.
Yeah,
to have a horror movie invent that is pretty good.
Yeah, I'd say so for sure.
Love Jaws, though.
Oh, yeah. Iconic film right there. I love the Captain.
Well, even the spin-offs, I don't think the sequels are that bad.
Yeah, there was the one...
There was 2, 3. 2's the same Captain.
Yeah, well, Richard Dreyfuss is in the second one.
Yeah.
And then I think the third one, it's his son or something like that. Yeah.
Great movies, though.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think I've seen the third one. I've seen the second one, though. Yeah, great movies.
I'll watch that movie every summer. I love that movie.
All right, I picked The Fly. So this is one of my favorite monster movies because my favorite actor of all time is in it, Vincent Price. I love Vincent Price. I think he's a brilliant, brilliant actor. Probably, I'd say he's my most favorite.
Yeah, I'd say he's your favorite.
I think he's just brilliant. So creepy. I mean, he's done everything there is to do with horror.
Even Scooby-Doo?
Yeah, Scooby-Doo. Michael Jackson.
Yeah.
Thriller. Alice Cooper. He did a song with Alice Cooper.
I mean, what else do you want?
So, but back to The Fly. So, The Fly is a science fiction horror movie. It came out in 1958. A quick little summary of the movie. It was basically this wife, husband is found dead in this hydraulic press. The wife confesses to the crime. She gets her brother, who is Vincent Price, to come and kind of help her with it and everything like that. She starts acting kind of weird, though. She has this obsession with flies and stuff like that. She starts acting kind of bizarre and everything like that. And Vincent Price is actually a scientist, and then her husband was a scientist, and Vincent Price also was a scientist too, but he was working on this teleportation machine, the husband was, and he ended up dying, and then somehow Vincent Price gets involved, and he ends up in the teleportation machine with the fly, but all it does is just turn his head into the head of a fly. It's really kind of corny. But it's iconic.
For the time, I'm sure it was
it was the 50s. It was one of those B movies, that it was a double feature actually with Space Master X7. So it was a double feature movie. Yeah. So you go to the theaters, you see that and that movie.
And if it wasn't for this movie, we wouldn't get the second Fly with Jeff Goldblum,
yes.
which is a little more intense.
Yeah,
the transition was a little more intense and scarier than this.
Yeah, this is there was a little bit of theatrics involved in the transformation, but essentially it was he walked in, he heard yelling, then he walked out and he had a fly. But yeah, it's one of my favorite movies. I like the one, obviously, the 50s one because it's got Vincent Price. But yes, I was going to say, then it leads us to, I think it was 1986 it came out, or 1988, but it was David Cronenberg, so he's a creature feature god.
Right.
I mean, Cronenberg's done so many creature movies. So he makes a direct remake of The Fly with Jeff Goldblum and Gina Davis. And yeah, that one's a lot more
intense, the transition with the fingernails and everything.
Yeah, I mean, he literally turns into the Fly,
yes.
And but same storyline and everything. It's a direct remake. It's just a little, better effects and everything, and it's Cronenberg directing it. So, yeah, that's The Fly. I mean, it's just a classic monster movie.
It's a unique concept.
It is pretty cool. Changing into the Fly.
It's a unique thing.
I don't know, he's saying, help me, or something like that. I can't remember what he's saying when Vincent Price gets turned into it. It's help me.
Squeaky voice now.
It's in a fly's voice. Oh, that's funny.
I mean, I hate flies, so it works.
Yeah. But yeah, that's essentially The Fly, so. I'm sure you guys have seen one of the two. I mean, they're iconic films.
Yeah, I'm sure at least the Jeff Goldblum one.
And there was like some remakes too. Oh, hang on a second, computer's fritzing here. Like The Return of the Fly that came out a year later, and then Curse of the Fly, and then you had the remake, The Fly, David Cronenberg, and then there was the Fly 2 remake in 1989, not by Cronenberg. I don't think I've seen that one, the second one that was made in the 80s. But I will give it a watch.
Yeah, we'll give it a go.
Yeah.
Okay, so for my last monster, I picked the one and only The Invisible Man, which he's definitely, at first I was kind of going back and forth on whether or not he's kind of a monster, but if you research, Universal Classic Monsters, Invisible Man is always on there, so I have no doubt or no problem with adding him. I think this is a great movie.
I agree.
I think he's a great villain. So essentially, The Invisible Man is a 1933 film directed by James Whale, and Claude Rains plays the role of Griffin, and he's the Invisible Man. It's actually based on a novel that came out in 1897 by H.G. Wells. And it's essentially all about a scientist who finds a way to become invisible and kind of wreaks havoc on the town because of that.
I think it makes him go crazy too, right? The stuff that turns him invisible.
I don't know. All I remember, we watched this like 2-3 years ago, but all I remember is that he would just kind of wreak havoc. He would do like petty crimes.
Yeah. Well, I think he was going insane though, and that's why he started doing that, because he was like a brilliant guy. I think. I'm not sure.
He was super smart. Yeah. But I mean, there's a lot to this character. When this movie came out, there was a lot of scientific advances. I'm sorry, when the book came out, there was a lot of scientific advances. So this was kind of touching on like, if we get to this point of technology where we can actually become invisible, where's the morality? Where's the ethics in this?
Yeah, where do you draw the line?
Should we be running around like this, wreaking havoc, essentially?
Right.
But, I mean, it's a fun movie. It's, and it's funny, like, the way it's filmed, because he's, like, wrapped all in, like, white. Almost like a mummy. So we can still see him, but other people can't see him in the movie, essentially.
Well, no, he actually, they do make him invisible. Like, he's just wrapped like that because he doesn't want to be, he still wants to have, like, form, essentially.
I see.
And then, he unbandages himself. And it's actually, they do great cinematography with
that. It's really well done, You'll see things moving in the background on their own, almost, and you're insinuating that he's moving them.
Yes, exactly.
He's invisible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the way they have him unwrapping himself and there's nothing behind the bandages, that's, like, awesome for the time in 1933 that came out.
That's really good, But I enjoy this movie. I think he's a good villain. That's about all I have to say. Anything else to say on Invisible Man?
No, not really. I mean,
it's an oldie but a goodie.
It's kind of just like they didn't do any like spin-offs or they did the remake of it that came out like 2-3 years ago, but that's not really the same story.
Not at all.
It's not like how this story was. But I enjoy it. That's one of my favorites.
I don't think it needs to be remade, honestly.
I think it's a good movie. I think it's like how I feel about the remake in Nosferatu. I mean, they've already remade it once. I don't try to remake it again. Just leave it alone. Let it be. All right, so for my last one, I did 1982's The Thing. So this is a remake that John Carpenter directed of the 1951 film The Thing from Another World. So essentially,
how are you going to explain this movie?
I don't know. It's
a great movie. Don't get me wrong.
So John Carpenter, God, I don't know. I don't even know where to start. So essentially, John Carpenter remade this movie. It's based on a novel, or novella that's titled "Who Goes There," and tells the stories of a group of American researchers in Antarctica who encounter an anomalous thing, an extraterrestrial life form that assimilates, imitates other organisms. Sorry, get tongue-tied there. So essentially, that's what he based it off of. So now there's a debate out there that's been kind of proved not the same. That it's not. It's not really a debate. I don't know what I'm trying to say here. I'm getting tongue-tied. I got a lot of thoughts running through my head.
Well, there's a lot to go into this movie.
So there's a thing out there that says that John Carpenter basically ripped off an H.P. Lovecraft story called The Mountains of Madness. This is not true from what I have found because it's a completely different story. It has to do with Antarctica and them encountering, but it's basically the H.P. Lovecraft story is about like finding an ancient civilization in Antarctica that's like these monsters from a prehistoric time, essentially.
And this story has been done before. I mean, there was an X-Files episode similar to this.
Essentially, yeah.
So, I mean, this story has been done.
But
not the way that John Carpenter did it with the special effects and everything, I will say.
Yeah, so The Thing, back to The Thing 1982, so just wanted to clear that up. There's no really correlation between the H.P. Lovecraft and the John Carpenter remake, or the remake of 1950, or the original movie of 1951. But the 1982 version of The Thing is probably the best one because it is just insane. So I'm sure a lot of you have seen The Thing, because it's a cult classic horror movie. I watch it at least twice a year. You've probably seen me wearing a shirt with The Thing on it, too. But it starts out, there's this Norwegian helicopter pursuing this dog. They're trying to shoot and kill this dog. And the American research team in Antarctica is seeing this helicopter, like, shooting, like, chasing something. The dog comes running into the American camp. Helicopter blows up with people inside, and the pilot is outside of the helicopter. He's trying to shoot at the Americans, so they end up shooting back and killing him and the dog, and they're like, what the hell? So Kurt Russell, the badass, R.J. McReady, goes with another doctor over to investigate the Norwegian base, and there's a bunch of, it's just complete mayhem over there. Bodies, frozen corpses, malformed humanoids, and we transfer some of the bodies over to the biologist to have him kind of look at it, and then they're kind of all like, what the hell, this is crazy, what's going on? They got no signal to call anybody or anything like that to make a report on it, so it sets a nice tone for a great movie. And then all of a sudden, the dog that came running, they have him in the kennel with a couple other dogs that they have, and guy goes back and looks looks to see what's going on, and the dog's like head's stretched out. Yeah. It's just insane. I love this movie. Stretched out like 10 feet long, and there's tentacles. It's very H.P. Lovecraft. I mean, it's like this tentacle monster thing coming out and eating the other dogs, and then essentially, I think they kill the dog, and then it jumps into one of them. So it's transferred, the thing's an alien life form that's transferred by blood somehow. So it's not like an actual, it has no form. It's
like airborne almost.
Yeah, it basically turns...
Like droplets.
Yeah, it basically just takes your body, imitates it into what it wants to be, essentially. You have no control over your body after it gets a hold of you, essentially.
Yeah, you can imitate it as yourself, even. Like you can pretend to be yourself.
Yeah, it could turn you into this. I mean, if you've seen the movie, I can't even begin to go into detail because it's so outrageous. And, like, guy's head turns into a spider and runs off his head. And just, it's insane. So it's definitely.
I love that part.
It's not really a classic like monster because everybody essentially gets turned into a monster by this alien life form essentially. So it's not really like a monster movie because everybody's turned into a monster essentially. And I think you got to burn it. It's the only way to kill it.
Yeah.
Or else it won't die essentially. And then at the end of the movie, you don't really know if they killed the monster because it's McReady and one other guy.
So you don't know.
Yeah, you don't know, and it could stay imitated, and they're getting like rescued and everything like that, and so you don't know if it's going to go bring it into America or Europe or wherever they're going to first. South America probably, and then this thing just is it's like a world eater, it just transfers so easily.
There's I watched an interview with John Carpenter about this movie. I think he was on like Jimmy Fallon or something, and they were essentially like, so who is the thing? Like, what is the thing? Mm-hmm. And he was like, what do you mean? And they were like, well, you never disclose in the movie, like, what it is or who it is or where it comes from, whatever. And he was like, no, I say it in the opening title. And if you look, it says, the way the title screen's set up is it says John Carpenter's with like a apostrophe on the S as if like he is. And then it says John Carpenter's The Thing. So I always thought, I was like, okay, so he's
funny.
I mean, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but it's like...
No, but it's his
like, movie. He can do whatever he wants, really.
He's like, I'm the thing. I'm the one who made it,
Right. And like there's an apostrophe on his S, so it's like he owns it or it's his, so it's John Carpenter's The Thing.
Right.
Which I thought was cool. When I saw that, I was like, oh, okay. That makes sense.
I know this is a great film. You just got to go watch it. I can't like describe it to you.
I know. We'll do another like, we'll do a thing on, like, I know we did, like, most brutal deaths in horror movies, but if we do iconic deaths, there's a lot of iconic death scenes in this movie, for sure.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And just the transformations. I mean, it's just, like, arms stretching and just, like, these weird appendages popping out of the body, and tentacles and intestines and tentacles.
Like the defibrillator scene when they're, like...
Yeah,
like right through the chest.
Go right through the chest. Oh man, it's insane. Yeah, it basically just turns your body into like an amorphous blob that can do whatever. It's like Play-Doh. This thing turns your body into Play-Doh to make it whatever it wants.
Yeah, and they reference this, the part where the guy turns into a spider, like his head turns into a spider. If you've seen the new It that they remade, they did a scene with that too. And they reference directly the scene, and they say like the same quote because he says like "no effing way" or something.
Yeah,
and they reference that in
you gotta be effing kidding me.
Yeah, something like that. And we're not swearing, so I don't know what YouTube's thing is. So
yeah, so
once we figure out that, we'll be not PG. But
yeah.
Anyways, but they referenced it in It, and I thought that was cool.
Oh yeah, it's a great film. So that is all that I have left to say about that.
So I did all my iconic characters. I wanted to touch on some honorable mentions that I found that I felt should be touched on. They're newer. They're not as probably well known, but I think that they should be on the list. Starting off strong, one of the monsters that I really love in the horror genre is Jeepers Creepers.
Oh yeah, great monster. Right
love there. Jeepers Creepers.
Yeah.
He's this like, God, I don't even know, like half bird, half man, half some kind of creature.
He's like a demon too.
Yes.
I don't know.
And he's kind of like It. Like he comes around every 23 years. And
for 23 days.
For 23 days, and he has to feed, and he feeds on your eyes so he can see, feeds on your lungs to breathe, and it's almost like folklore-ish, but love Jeepers Creepers, love Justin Long in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
This is one of my comfort movies. I'll watch this all the time. Even the second one's not as good, but I'll still watch it.
Yeah, no, I haven't seen the newest one, not the one that's like a wicked rip-off of it, but like the newest one that I think Peter Silva. Peter Silva directed. He redirected it. Yeah,
I love Jeepers Creepers. He has like this monster appearance, but he wears almost like a cowboy hat. He has like leathery wings, sharp claws, and he just essentially comes around, collects a bunch of body parts so he can come back again and feast the 23 years.
Exactly, he's got food.
He's a great monster. Next, I picked they're known as the crawlers from The Descent. Which, if anybody's seen The Descent, you know exactly what I'm talking about.
That's a good monster movie.
I think everybody should see this movie. It's basically about a bunch of... They're not like... I guess they're like not cave divers, but it's a group of women, and they go to discover this new cave because they're like athletic and hikers, whatever.
Sure.
And it's this cave that's never been discovered before, and there's these creatures that have lived down there for years and years and years, and they're super violent, they're creepy looking, and
It's a great movie.
They have like a humanoid appearance, but they have sharp teeth and claws. They're super pale.
Yeah, and they're like cannibalistic too.
Yes.
So they're obviously eating these people when they kill them.
And they're blind because they've adjusted to living
in complete darkness. Yeah.
So they just hear really well. So they're trying to hunt them, but they're completely blind.
Yeah, there's a lot of them too. It's like
they're everywhere. Oh my God.
It's not everywhere. Like there's like 2 or 3. There's probably like 30 of them.
Another monster I want to touch on is a lesser known one, but I think it's a goodie. I almost actually had it on my list, is Basket Case.
Oh, yeah. That's a classic monster.
This could be, I guess, under maybe like if we do like B horror movies.
Yeah, definitely.
Basket Case. B horror movie. But essentially, it's like 2 brothers that when they're in the womb and they're born, they're like conjoined side by side, but they have a surgery against their will. They have surgery to separate them.
Yeah.
So one brother is fully formed adult man, and then the other one's just a little creature thing that you literally have to put in a basket to carry it around.
Yeah.
You can't.
It's got no arms or legs. It's like a face that's like a blob.
Look up a picture. Just to be fair, look up a picture of it.
That's an iconic one.
And they try to seek revenge on the surgeon that separated them because they never wanted to be separated. But it's a great horror movie.
Yeah, the noise it makes when it's killing is like, it's just like screaming.
If we ever do, like I said, like a B horror movie thing, we'll definitely touch on Basket Case.
Oh yeah.
Last one I want to mention here, it's one of, I think, the best movies to come out of 2023 is The Monster from Barbarian. Which, this is a spoiler alert because I think going into this movie, the less you know, the better. So if you haven't seen it, stop listening. but it's, you know, they go to an Airbnb and they find this creature in the basement, and the creature is essentially years and years and years of inbreeding.
Yes.
And living in a cave, basically, and,
it's
you know...
like a weird, like, fallout shelter type
yes.
of thing.
Never seeing sunlight, never doing anything, and it's like the 7-foot tall, naked, inbred-looking woman, and she's violent, she's cannibalistic, she's all sorts of things, and as far as like newer monster movie goes, that's one of my favorite ones for sure.
I will give it that. It's definitely a newer, like, you don't see a lot of monster movie remakes anymore. If you do, they're like supernatural monsters and stuff like that, so it's cool to see like a creature feature again, you know?
Yeah, I want to touch on some of the newer ones too, because we touched on a lot of the old ones, so I mean, they're not super new. Jeepers Creepers was like 2000s, but
yeah.
I mean, I like those ones a lot as well.
Sure.
So, I was going to ask you, who is your favorite monster out of all these?
Favorite monster. I like Christopher Lee as Dracula, so I'd probably pick Dracula. Yeah.
I was going to ask you too, who do you think would win? Like if they were all in a fight, it'd have to be in the water. It'd have to be in the water for Gilman and Jaws. But if they were all in a fight,
well, Jaws would win.
well, like they have to be like, I don't know, like at least in like standing water. So
okay, standing water.
You know what I mean?
Let's just let's just do like the ones that are humanoid. I would probably say King Kong because he's like 60 times the size of everybody who would just step on him and kill him.
I was thinking that too. Because the other ones aren't super violent; they're just creepy looking.
Yeah.
You know, like Invisible Man, Dracula, Frankenstein. They're not super.
No, they're not.
They're
like
just creepy looking.
Yeah, they're not. I don't think there's. I think that was kind of the whole point of them was to be more kind of scary, not like violent. You know.
Not have this like superhuman strength.
Yeah, it's not like a true up monster. Right. You know.
All right. Anything else you want to touch on?
No, I think I hit all my points. What about you? Anything else?
No, I think I touched all my points. Go check out these movies if you haven't seen them.
Yes, please do.
We'll be back next Monday with something spooky.
Yes, we will.
And until then, do you want to say it or do you want me to say it?
Stay spooky, everybody.